Today, how to buy the right property. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, one that is post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today, I'm joined by Warwick Brooks. Hi, Warwick.
Hey, how are you, Martin?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Now, you are Senior Property Advisor at Longview, and this is a really interesting conversation, right? Because you spend a lot of your time on the buyer side of the conversation. And I'm really interested in that because my sense is, and I could be wrong, but quite often buyers, when they're thinking about property, don't necessarily ask themselves the right questions on the way in. And presumably that's where you can help.
Definitely. There are a lot of different things to think about before purchasing a property, and a lot of people definitely don't think them through, and they make the mistake, then the in and out costs can be a bit of money.
Right, and the point there is if you do buy the wrong property, right, it's not just a one-off problem. It's a problem for as long as you own the property, right? So it runs down the years or whatever. And quite often, I certainly see later in my surveys that people made the wrong buying decision on the way in, are sort of struggling to work out what to do and ultimately cut their losses. But in doing so, they miss the opportunity cost, don't they?
Definitely. That's a lot of the hard conversations we have to have for people who did buy the wrong property, and letting them kind of have those conversations around, okay, where do you cut your losses? And if we move on to something else, how do we make that up? And that can be a hard conversation, but we definitely have that every week at the moment.
And so if somebody comes to you and say, hey, I'm thinking of buying a property, what are the first couple of questions that you would normally throw at them?
So we have the two different categories, I suppose. So there's the investors. So essentially with investors, we say, this is our philosophy on investing in real estate, and this is what we believe in. And we tell them not to get as emotionally involved, charged in it, because it's about purchasing the right property in the right location that will give them the best benefit. It's not about being in the same suburb you live in, or what your friends said at a barbecue. And then we have the homeowners, and the homeowners are a lot bigger conversation around, okay, what are you wanting to choose? How long is this for? A big conversation I have a lot of the time is for the younger ones. When you're getting married, when you're going to have kids, kind of how does that play out, and how that kind of, where do we want to be, and make them think forward so that they don't make the wrong mistake about buying something that just doesn't suit them in a couple of years' time, and then having to sell and then buy in again.
Right, so it's important to have that forward-looking view rather than just thinking of it in transactional terms. And presumably, if you're buying a property to live in, you're almost always going to have to make some compromises somewhere, aren't you?
Definitely. This is the thing that a lot of people, we just try to really get across to them, is that you're never going to, very rarely do people find the perfect property. So you do need to compromise on some things. And I've bought properties from 300,000 up to 9 million for residential, and at 9 million they're still compromising on what they want. So it is about kind of understanding those things.
Right, and sometimes you'll find, I suspect, as you have that conversation, particularly if there's more than one party involved in buying something, that sometimes they may not agree on what's the most important things. Is it location, or is it the number of rooms, or is it something else? So do you have to sort of get into some counselling mode sometimes to try and sort of figure out how you get those trade-offs?
Definitely, a lot of counselling is involved, because a lot of times when we are dealing with a couple, then they do have differences of opinions on different things, and it's about kind of making them both kind of figure out, okay, what am I willing to give away, and what don't I want to give away, and then kind of meeting in the middle. But the process of that is in our initial stages with the clients. It does actually, a big part of our work is really refining what they're wanting and understanding that with your budget, this is what you'll be able to get, and this is what you need to sacrifice. And if you don't want to sacrifice that, then we need to go somewhere else.
Right, and that is a very important point, isn't it? Sometimes if you settle on a particular area and then you realise that your budget really can't get you there, you've either got to compromise in terms of, buying something smaller or an apartment or something, or you look further out or you look somewhere different. To what extent do you find that people are willing to look beyond their sort of area of immediate choice?
We have a pretty good rate of clients taking our advice, because a lot of what we do is, because if you're trying to buy in an area that, let's say that you can't afford to live in that area, and just explaining to the client that buying a compromised property will affect them in the long term, because it will always be compromised, and you buying it cheaper in that area, there's a reason for it, and typically you're selling it that way as well, versus buying something in a different location that will still suit them, but you're going to have that more boxes ticked on what is a good property, and have more people wanting to buy that when you want to sell it.
Yeah, it can be tricky. Now, let me flick then across to the investment conversation, because currently, one of the questions that I often come up against is the sort of expectations from investors that magically, if they buy an investment property, it automatically grows in value. And, we're talking not just multiple years, but, in a few months, right? Now, I think both you and I would say, if you're thinking of an investment property, you should be thinking over a much longer time period. What sort of time period do you think property investors should be thinking about?
I tell people minimum 10 to 15 years. Normally the first couple of years, you're just getting back your stamp duties, and if it is performing well. But I have a lot of people that come to me that have owned properties for 10 years in Melbourne that are worth less than what they paid for them. So I do say to them, and those ones are the ones that you have to just get out of, but it is really a longer term process, and the market's changed a lot since COVID, so the markets are starting to change as a result of that, and that's kind of where things that you might have thought will go up more in value, we're starting to kind of reassess that they may not now, and that different properties now are going to work with the new way that things are going.
And one of the little challenges that I sometimes come up against is a property investor who says, well, look, I think I would do better to buy 3 or 4 lower priced units rather than one, larger priced house. What's your perspective on the units versus houses part of the equation at the moment?
I've been buying for 22 years now, and houses have beaten units that whole time. So units have performed very badly over the last few years, especially off the plan is horrible. But even the ones that we typically thought were good investments, like the Art Decos in the 1950s and 60s, have still not even come close to buying a house. And they used to perform. So if we go back and look at them from 2000 to 2015, they've got great growth rate. But then from around about, probably 2013 onwards, they've kind of stagnated, and COVID has really kind of hit the nail in the coffin for units, and people being able to work from home, where they can go a bit further out, they can live in houses, and they want a bit more land.
Right, and just to be clear, that's even from an investment perspective, because of course if you're thinking about an investment, you need somebody who's going to want to rent it afterwards. And at the moment, if I look at the vacancy rates for apartments in and around Melbourne are still very high, and the rents, according to the ABS, went backwards over the last little while. Whereas for houses, there seems to be more demand, as you say, partly because of the COVID and working from home. And the fact is that you tend to see probably a smaller number of ideal houses relative to apartments. Lots of apartments around at the moment, so it is partly a supply-demand thing. Are there particular areas in Melbourne, because you cover the Melbourne area, where houses are looking particularly good at the moment?
In the fringe areas, I suppose, are performing exceptionally well, especially out in the outer north, and even pushing out to the east. I mean, what we've seen a change. I mean, typically you've always had your blue chip inner east kind of areas that have performed exceptionally well for over a long period of time, and some of these further ones out. And we had with the east has pushed further out because of the demographic. But some of the other areas kind of going out to north and even pushing out to kind of northwest areas, they're really starting to see a surge. And I'm not talking about house and land packages because those are not great in my opinion. But I'm talking about buying decent sized blocks of land that you can either at some point put something on it if you wanted to, put a couple on it, or just hold it and land bank it. Because I think that as those house and land package areas build around certain locations, the people with the bigger land lots in the older sections will benefit greatly from that.
Right. Well, you've taken me to exactly this topic I wanted to cover off before we finish, and that is the homeland package area. Because again, in my surveys, I see a lot of people having made very bad homeland package decisions, partly influenced by all of the government incentives, the stamp duty holidays and the extra money that was around there. Why is it that the homeland package sector is just so tricky?
Well, it's typically just a supply and demand model. There's just Melbourne or Victoria. Melbourne's got a lot of flat area. So there's just an unlimited supply of flat land where they can just build and build and build. And they're building properties that in reality, subpar quality, to be able to build them at that price. And they're putting like 300 square metre block. Your backyard in a lot of these places is lucky to be 2 metres. And they're carving them up smaller and more. You used to buy them, they were on bigger blocks, and to keep the prices of the value of the house lower, they have to reduce the land size, because as we know, the land is what's values in. And this is where they've just proven to be a bad investment, because there's just a oversupply. I mean, they build around about 40,000 a year in Victoria. So there's an ongoing supply, and then they've always come up with a new kind of, okay, this house next year has got this new feature. So the older houses just don't. Why would you buy the old house when you can get a new house for $50,000 more?
Right, and that's a really important point, right? Because you might buy it new off the plan, so a home and land package off the plan, but then it's no longer new, right?
No.
It is then a second-hand house, and down the road they're still building more new homeland packages, as you say, with perhaps extra bells and whistles. So almost always you start to see prices going backwards rather than forwards over that sort of 2 to 3 year time horizon. The other point I'd make is that it looks to me as though the settlement and build times for homeland packages have really blown out, partly because of the fact that there was a big boost because of home builder, and partly also the fact that they can't get the parts, the supply chain issues, and of course labour's a problem as well. So quite often people are spending a lot longer waiting for that land package to be completed. And I also notice in some of my surveys that some people get caught out because whilst it's meant to be a fixed price, there are some weasel words in the contracts which allows for some types of variations, particularly for extended duration labour costs, and also component costs as well, if those costs go up. So people have to be really, really careful with these as well, don't they?
Yeah, a lot of people do get caught out with them. Some of the builders do fixed price contracts, but even the builders that are doing fixed price contracts now, that were doing them, have stopped now doing them, and have pretty much, a lot of them are cancelling their previous contracts with people who have bought. So they've bought, they put their deposit down, and now the builders are actually tearing up the contract and saying we're not going to do it because the costs have risen too much to build it. So it's actually going to be really interesting to see how the house and land package, with the cost of wood, cost of steel, and labour issues, to see how that kind of it's definitely going to push the price of the builds up, and therefore will push the price of the house and land package up, and may push it out of the reach of the people that they're supposed to be for.
Right, and of course, if you've actually contracted to essentially get a mortgage at a certain size to be able to actually buy the homeland package, if the cost starts spiralling higher, you could actually end up with a mortgage that is no longer fit for purpose. And that creates another problem. Again, I've had some conversations recently with a couple of people who thought they'd got a deal, and then the bank said, no, we've just given you a provisional agreement, not a certain agreement. Now the ground shifted under them, and then there was the question of, can they find an alternative, or are they actually unable to compete? And of course, if you can't compete, then you potentially lose what you've already put into it.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't understand that even if the bank says that they'll give them money, but if the build's 12 to 18 months, then the bank will reassess their situation. If there's things change in their lives over that time, then you may not be able to get the money.
Exactly. And then it's a really hard situation to know what to do. Okay, last thing, just to cover before we finish. In terms of the sort of the types of people who come and seek your help, to what extent are they locals who know Melbourne, and to what extent are they people from interstate or indeed from overseas who need that local knowledge to be able to guide to a solution? What's the mix of business that you do?
I typically do around about 95% local. So majority of my clientele is local. And they're just people that are really struggling with the market either rising, properties being sold quickly, struggling to deal with real estate agents. So a lot of the time it is just local people.
Yeah, and I do find that really interesting because, again, I see that in my surveys. If you ask people, they would say, oh, that must be people from overseas or, people from interstate. But actually, even locals really need the help because this is a pretty complicated process that they're getting involved in. And, it's not like riding a bike. You don't do it enough times to be able to actually get all the bases covered. The market changes, the rules change, the laws change as well. So there's a lot to trip up over. And so quite often having somebody who can essentially work with them to be able to be a bit of a guide is actually pretty powerful, not least because you can end up perhaps making better decisions or not making bad decisions. But also I suspect, and perhaps you can correct me, but suspect sometimes the time process, the time frames can be compressed a bit if you do things in the right order. And sometimes my expectation as to when you do things isn't what vendors actually or buyers actually do. So you end up having to go around the houses a few times. So that's another reason why this is a pretty important conversation.
Yeah, we definitely do compact the time frame required because we have a whole research team. We have people on the ground. We get through everything as soon as it hits the market. We assess it. But the biggest thing for people with what we do is if we can talk them out of buying a property that is going to cost them a lot of money in the long term, then the benefit is there. And I see every day people that I get emails from people that have made the wrong choices in property, and there's a lot of people losing money out there, and getting it right is really important.
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the reasons why this channel exists and why you guys exist as well. If people want to find out more about Longview, where do they go?
I can go to longview.com.au. But we have you can look at our buying section on our website. We can download a property purchase checklist. It gives you around about 80 different things to look at when you're going through a house. And we can, if you want to book a chat with us, it's obligation free. And definitely, we'd love to help people. That's what we're here for.
Thank you very much. 80 questions. Well, that should be a warning to people. It's worth looking at. Warwick, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and great to catch up.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks. Bye-bye.